know exactly. There's no indicator that it's like doesn't count down or anything. So I'm gonna, yeah. All right, we're live. Hey, everybody. I'm going to get going. And so, just so you know, we are absolutely 2 days away from the launch of Faces of Grief. I cannot believe that it technically launches on Tuesday. It's crazy. We've been putting this project together for almost a year and or 11 months, I should say, right? Because we started in the beginning of the year, and it is Tuesday it is. So I'm going to put in the comments pre-order link if you want to support us, because we're trying to get on the the top seller list of Amazon. There's a Kindle version that'll come out right on the 3rd. The hard copy of the book, I think, takes about another week or so until we can get a link and get actual physical copies in our hand. So I'll put the link for both the Kindle version and the pre-order of the hard copy, so this way you have it. But here I am with one of the other authors, Elizabeth, and we have been trying to connect since probably the beginning of the project, and our schedules haven't aligned. So Liz, tell us, I don't know why. Are you okay with Liz? I don't
No,
know,
I go
right?
by Elizabeth. That's
That didn't
okay.
sound right when I said it, but like I always, so Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your story is about, because these interviews, I think, with the complete breadth of death and non-death related losses, and yours is a very special loss that you're telling about. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself and about the loss and your story in the book itself.
Thanks, Jason. And thanks so much for this opportunity. Because grief is so universal. We all have experiences of it some way, one way or another. But it's also very unique. So my chapter in the book is actually about the grief inherent in the system of adoption.
Mm.
So I am an adult adoptee. I've lived in reunion with my biological family for 25 years now. And then I'm also an adoptive mother to a 13-year-old daughter. And we are living partly in reunion with part of her biological family that we found about 4 years ago. And so, I think in our society, we have this sort of fairy tale notion of adoption, like, oh, it's so beautiful. And, baby gets adopted and gets a home. And, a mother can feel good that her child's raised by these wonderful parents, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that it's a system that is built on grief and loss and trauma.
Yeah.
And I think over the last decade or two, we're seeing more and more people in the adoption community talking about this and
Mm.
talking about the grief that particularly adoptees carry into the world with us, and how it impacts, sort of who we are and how we show up in the world. So,
Yeah.
so when I first talked with, we should give a shout out to Samantha Ruth,
Yeah.
who is the founder of Grief Hab and who pulled us all together for this Faces of Grief book. When she and I first talked back in the spring, and she said, what would you want to talk about? And I was like, well, I could talk about death of my parents, or I could talk about miscarriages, or I could talk about moves, or, like there's so many different types of grief.
Yeah.
But then when she was sharing with me the variety of people on the project, I said, well, I really want to talk about adoption because it's not something that people talk a lot about in terms of the grief aspect of it.
Well,
So.
yeah, and that, like, I never even thought, like, for me, before I got into this project, I mentioned on a couple of interviews already, is that because mine is a death related loss, right? Like, that's in my head. I have this very sort of narrow view too of the grief and how, but now that I've come in contact with people like you and Jan and a bunch of the other authors that go through that loss, the similar things that happen in death related losses, but they're not death related losses.
Right.
It definitely has opened my awareness around that, and how I think there needs to be new languaging around grief itself, like expanding that language so that this way everyone has a place in the grief space,
Well, it's so true. And I was actually just talking with some friends this morning about the power of language. And I think you're right. I think we do need to look at that about how we talk about grief differently. I
Yeah,
mean, the word that I think I always use talking about grief is that it's complex.
yeah,
Like it is so complex. Like I know I mentioned to you texting this morning, I live in Asheville, North Carolina. So for those of you watching from all over, we were, ground zero for
yeah,
Hurricane Helene, and our whole city has been devastated. And so living here during this time, it's like everybody is grieving, but the experiences are so completely different. Some of us didn't have water for 2 months, and other people had their homes wash away down the river, and other people had loved ones pass away in the floodwaters.
yeah.
And yet it's a common experience. And I think that's what I love about this Faces of Grief project that we're on is that, your story of sibling loss versus, someone else of a parent loss or someone else with child loss or divorce or in my case adoption, it's like they're completely different, and yet there are pieces that tie us all together.
Yeah, yeah. And I always find that, especially around the word grief, like it they're they are different and universal at the same time. And when we start to like kind of living our lives, what's the difference between grief and just being a human being having a certain experience, right? Like everything is so different. And then when we start to put grief onto everything, it's like, well, we may be also overgeneralizing that too, because yeah, sure, everything has an effect on us. But and when I work with my clients, I try to put that grief in the proper perspective, right? Like we all go, like it's been 26 years for me. I mean, it's been a whole lot, with your adoption story, it's been a whole lifetime for you. And it's like, but how do we put that in the proper place within the context of our lives and it not just superseding everything else? And so it's definitely a challenge or a little, game. I don't know, game is not the right word, but like fitting the right puzzle pieces together. I think that's the metaphor. I think it for me is more appropriate, right?
Well, yeah, and I agree. In fact, I was just talking to someone about this the other day. It's that you never get over the grief, but you learn how to carry it differently. And
Yeah,
you carry it differently at different stages in your life. The grief, 1 year after your loss, whatever that is going to be different than 10 years, is even different. I think, my dad died 30 years ago.
right.
Do I cry about him every day? No. But a couple times a year, something will come up and remind me of him, and I'll just have a good little boohoo fest, and that's appropriate.
Yeah,
But it doesn't impact how I'm walking around in the world every day anymore, like
right.
it did at the beginning. Yeah.
Yes, and I think we have these. I know I do these like expectations of what grief what grief is, and especially in the beginning, I thought, oh, year one was terrible. How could it be worse than this? And then year two comes, and oh yeah, right, it is because I'm not
Year
numb
two is
anymore.
always the worst. Yes, yes.
Right. And I wish someone would say, okay, yes, year one sucks, but there's a numbness, there's like a survival, like like that
Yeah.
when you get into like the traumatic situation, there's that almost dissociation that happens, right? And then
Yes.
year two comes and you're fully associated in your life and things, and so it can be worse in a lot of cases. And I wish someone had kind of braced me for that because I didn't expect that. And then I'm like, oh, right. Now I have to actually feel all the things because the numbness is now worn off.
That is such a good point, Jason. Maybe that should be your next book or your next writing. It's about year two.
Year
But I
two,
think
right?
but I think you're right though. People, we don't really talk about that enough. And it's actually a really good point because when depending on or no matter what the loss is, I agree with you. I think year two, because that's when suddenly you're really feeling it.
Yeah,
And then you've got to decide, am I going to give myself permission to feel it?
yeah.
And really work with it and be present with it and allow it. But the problem is, and I know we've talked about this in our group, but our society doesn't
Oh,
create the space for us to do that. You have 3 days of bereavement leave, when
yeah,
a loved one dies, and then you got to go back to work. Like that's insane. I
yeah.
mean,
It's crazy.
yeah, it's just totally crazy. So,
Yeah, and then that's when there people are like, aren't you over that yet?" I'm like,
right.
Like, right? I'm like, well, no,
Like,
I'm actually just getting started. Let's,
right, right.
and that's why,
Exactly.
as I said, like to have those tools and strategies, like I love working with people within like the first year because that's when the tool, like that's when you really need to learn the tools, because when year number two comes along, if you don't have those tools in place and to give yourself permission to have those moments where you just need to cry your eyes out or lock yourself in a room or stay in bed, right? Like you need to have tools and strategies and give to be able to give yourself permission to experience what you're experiencing, and then how do I move forward from there, right? So
Right. And that's interesting. And you and I should talk more offline about this because I really enjoy working with people after the first year. So I don't think I've even said what I am. I'm a coach and I'm a shamanic practitioner and healer. And so I have a program called Solid Ground where I help people who are navigating grief and loss, and they're sort of on the tail end of the shock and trauma of it, and they're
right.
like, so now what, like how do I integrate, like I still haven't totally found my footing yet,
Yep.
but I'm on my way.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, how do I learn how to integrate this in my life? So yeah, maybe you and I need to talk about a
Yeah,
little
we'll
collaboration.
definitely connect offline for sure. Like once the book is fully like out in the world for sure.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But I want to like kind of come back to the adoption piece for you. Like I can't imagine. So you've been through that as the adoptee, right? And then you're now the parent of an adopted person. Like, so there's got to be different levels. Like, see, maybe even, do you ever see your story in your daughter's story?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many commonalities between what she and I are experiencing. One of the things that we don't really talk enough about, or that I think not we don't talk about in the adoption community, we do, in the non-adoption world, people don't understand the importance of that genetic mirroring.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so when you grow up in a family that you do not look like, there is this real almost disassociation, like feeling alien and feeling other. And I was 29 years old when I very first met my biological family. And I
Okay.
actually have, I met my birth mom and my birth dad, and then I actually have 11 half brothers and sisters.
Wow.
So I was raised as an only child, and my birth mom raised three kids, and my birth dad raised eight children. So, it wasn't until I was a full grown adult that I had that experience of that genetic mirroring and feeling like I belonged. Whereas my daughter was 9 when she met her birth dad and
Mm.
his side of the family. And so it's been really fascinating for me watching her navigate that, because when she's with her birth dad or her grandmother or her uncle, she's just, oh my gosh, she's so comfortable in her skin.
Right, right.
And it makes my mama's heart so happy to see that for her, because she's getting something that I didn't have as a child.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. Yet the reality is, so many people don't have that experience in adoption. Certainly those of us who were adopted, um, you know, decades ago. I mean, I'm in my 50s. We didn't have that experience because mostly the system was closed adoption. Now more and more adoptions are open.
Awesome.
But even so, openness doesn't guarantee a relationship. So
Well,
that's complex as
and
well.
I think because you have had that experience, right? Like you don't get defensive. You're not as
Right.
defensive when you see your daughter, like your daughter by choice, right? Like interacting with her biological family. And so,
Yes.
and I think that like I know when it comes to even the grief therapy, like having a therapist that has walked that path is really
Yes.
important, because there are so many things that they understand, not just from a book knowledge level, but
That's
from an
right.
experience level. And I think it serves so much more when the person that you're working with has gone through it, because then you'll say things that won't set off like, these alarm bells, where if you were dealing with somebody else that doesn't have the experience would. go through, right? Does that?
Yes, exactly. Well, and I think that's true for all of our griefs. And that's what I love so much about this book project that we're involved in, Jason, is that
Yeah.
we're really elevating and amplifying the voice of grief. First of all, saying like it's real, it happens, we all have to deal with it. But then
Yep.
we're helping people go, oh, if I talk with other people who share the similar type of loss as me,
Yep.
that's going to help me feel witnessed and seen and not so alone in the world.
Yep.
And I think that's so important because often I think when these things happen, we think, oh, I'm the only person who's been through this, or I don't know anybody who's been through this, which in some cases might be true. You
Yes.
might be the first of your friends to have a particular loss. But then as you get out there, and that's what I love about social media,
Yeah.
is that then we go, oh, well, oh, they experienced that too. Well, maybe let me connect with them. And so then we see and understand, and it's that witnessing of one another that is so important.
Well, and I also think on the flip side, to be involved in this project with people with different kinds of losses is also serves, because you're like, oh, I didn't realize that this
Yeah.
was a thing. Like I was talking with Lisa the other day, who's a mom who lost her son, and she's been trying to connect. And just with our conversations, she sees what I've been through. She's read my story and knows my like how I've been dealing with my grief. And she's like, oh, right, my son must be feeling something similar, right? So,
Right.
so just to see it from the different perspectives, I also thinks it gives value, because then, someone who's dealing with a different kind of grief can understand then, what maybe their other family members are going through, or their, so I think it all serves in a very large way. And we all talk about our issues in these sort of closed communities. Like you said, the
Mhm.
adoption community, oh, we talk about that all the time, but it's bringing it to the public. It's bringing it
Yeah.
out in social media. It's making those conversations much more just in the public, so that we can have open and honest conversations and get rid of some of the expectations that people have about different topics, right?
Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying, Jason. And the other thing, and again, this is also very front and center because of my experience of living in Asheville right now. But what I think grief does when we really acknowledge it is it allows us to increase our empathy
Yeah.
and our kindness towards one another.
Yep.
If we were to walk around the world and look at every single person that we meet and go, oh, I know you're carrying some kind of grief. I know something difficult has happened to you, and maybe it's not now, and maybe it's not last week, but it's part of the fabric of who you are. I think if we have that awareness, and I really think this is what Sam is trying to do
Yeah.
for all of us, is elevate this conversation about grief. The world would just be a kinder and more gentler place.
Right. And I do believe that, like, as individuals, we all have our own challenges, right? Like, and it's not about
Sure.
getting rid of the challenge, right? Like
Right.
but
No.
it's about like learning to cope and deal and manage. And I think we all have like if we look, most of us have this one thing that like just pushes our buttons, but that's like where our biggest learning comes from. And how can
Yes.
we take that? I love language again. How do we take our mess and make it our message, right? Like
Yes.
because like I didn't want to do that for many, many years. I'm just like, yeah, I'm not going to do the grief thing. I don't want to really be connected or associated with it. And then the universe kind of stepped in and said, well, we got other plans for you. Like we're going to eventually make it so that you have no choice, and right, like you're going to see all of the signs that come your way once you step into that role, because you need to be the one. You can't just complain that nobody's talking about the grief and then not do anything about it. So
Yeah.
you have to start talking about it first, and then give permission for other people to talk about their own grief and their own, challenges.
Well, and I think that permission piece, that word is such a powerful word because it's true. It's like when we speak our truth, then it gives other people permission to do the same.
Yeah.
And then that's where the real connections and the real authentic conversations happen between people. So
100%. So I know you have some time commitment, so I want to honor
yeah.
sort of your time and kind of like give it a little close. So what would be your like one piece of advice for people who are either have been adopted or are adopting, like what is the biggest piece of advice that you can give to them about any of the challenges that they may be facing?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I would say just honestly, the word that comes to mind, and it's interesting, is around gentleness and
Mhm.
around grace. It's about being really tender and intentional and mindful, um, and just patient with the process, and understanding the complexities and all the layers of it. And of course, for anybody, I think dealing with any kind of grief, I know you asked me about adoption, but it certainly is talk to other people,
Oh,
do your research, read your books, talk to professionals, get your support systems in place as you're navigating, your
well, right, and
situation.
and knowing how it ties together, right? Like I had a bereaved sibling who unfortunately passed a few years ago, but her mantra was be gentle with yourself, right? Because we get so hard on ourselves with, oh, I should be at a different level, or I should be able to manage this, or we have all of these expectations. And when you're gentle with yourself, you can just let go of some of those expectations and just let the natural time and the rhythm of your grief be what
Yeah.
it is, and and learn to work with it rather than fight against it.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Awesome.
true. Well,
So
thank you. And Jason, I just want to say thanks for having these conversations with all of the different authors. I think you're really shedding some different light on what we're all dealing with. So hopefully the folks who are watching got something good out of this.
yeah,
So
awesome. Yeah, every I get good feedback from all, even my
good.
friends, like that have just watched it off of my Facebook page. So thank you so much. And remember, Faces of Grief launches on Tuesday. I'm going to put two links in the comments, one for the Kindle version and one for the hard copy, so that this way the Kindle version I think is only 99 cents. So please purchase that so we can be like a number one bestseller on Amazon, because that'll help to get the word out. Even
Yes.
if it's just like, and it's just 99 cents. That's all it is. It's $1. You spend more on, you know,
Coffee. Right.
anything else.
Yeah,
What's $1 these days, right?
that's right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And yeah, just stay tuned on Tuesday and for Faces of Grief. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.